We are in a series called The Gospel of Exodus, which is kind of a strange name, but we called it that because everything in the book of Exodus and the story of Exodus points towards Jesus, and everything that happens in the four Gospels is kind of built off of and built on top of the foundation of Exodus. This story that shows God's character, who he is, and also not only shows who God is, but invites us to have an intimate relationship with him. So we've been talking about the book of Exodus, and we're going to be in chapter 2 today, but just a quick review so far. The Israelite people, the Hebrew people, were enslaved in Egypt, and because the Egyptians dreaded them, had this fear and dread of the people of God, and so they enslaved them, and then when that didn't work, when the Hebrew midwives didn't listen to Pharaoh, because Pharaoh wanted to eventually kill the baby boys of these people. And so that didn't work, though, because the Hebrew midwives didn't listen to Pharaoh. Instead, they did what was right in God's eyes, not what was right in Pharaoh's eyes. And when that failed, Pharaoh then made this horrible, horrible decree to throw all the Hebrew baby boys into the Nile River, which is what we talked about last week. And in the midst of that, four different women saved the life of Moses. The Hebrew midwives saved Moses' life by not fearing Pharaoh, but instead by fearing God. And then Moses' mother placed Moses in this basket that's called an ark. So she had faith in God and put him, to save her child, put him on the waters in a safe ark. And then that ark was found by Pharaoh's daughter, who instead of killing Moses, she adopted him into her household. And she saved this Egyptian, who was supposed to be a bad guy, saved Moses' life, and then adopted him and raised him as an Egyptian. Which leads us to chapter 2, verse 11. And this is actually the first time we're really going to get a look at Moses. Who is this guy? Now, he's going to be one of the most important people, not only in the book of Exodus, but in the entire Bible. Like, Jesus is the most important dude, but coming up and fighting for second, I think, would be Moses. For people of the Jewish faith, Moses is the most important guy. Like, he is number one. And for a long time, Moses was kind of the most exemplary servant of God we have in the Bible. He's the guy God uses to bring the Israelites out of Egypt. So he's super important, super crucial to what's going to happen. And so he's our main character. So I'm sure we all have the question of who is this guy, what is special about him, and why does God choose him to be his servant? What can we learn from Moses? So that's going to be our question today. But just a quick reminder of what we know about Moses so far. He is raised by Pharaoh's daughter. Pharaoh's the most powerful, wealthy man in the world at the time. So he is raised as an Egyptian in a very prestigious, privileged Egyptian place. However, we also know about Moses is that his mother did actually nurse him and raise him for the first few years, or help raise him for the first few years of his life. So he's an Egyptian, and he's also kind of a Hebrew. If that wasn't confusing enough for him, I talked about last week how the name Moses means two things. In Egyptian, the name Moses means son of, like S-O-N. Basically, his name just means like he's somebody's son, like he's somebody's kid. And then in Hebrew, his name means drawn out of the waters or pulled out of the waters. So this Hebrew, who's raised by Egyptians, actually has a name that works in both Egyptian and Hebrew. And with that, we're going to dive into Exodus chapter 2, starting in verse 11. And it says this: one day, after Moses had grown up, I'm actually going to read from up here, he went out to where his people were and watched them in their labor. And he saw an Egyptian beating a Hebrew, one of his own people. I'm just going to pause right there because, like I said, here we go. Moses is grown up now. He's not a child anymore. We don't know how old he is anymore, but he's considered an adult now. And one day he decides to leave Pharaoh's household and go down and see his own people and see what their world is like. Now, I don't know if this is the first time Moses has seen the oppression of his people. I don't know if this is something he's thought about a long time or if this is just a first-time thing. But regardless, I'm sure Moses grew up a little confused about his identity, a little confused about who exactly am I? And something I love about Moses, man, is he can't just stay in Pharaoh's household, but he makes a choice to go see what's going on with his people and see the suffering that is happening to his people. And when he sees that here, what does he see? But he sees an Egyptian beating a Hebrew. Immediately, Moses is put in a situation where, okay, is he Egyptian or is he a Hebrew? We're about to find out. Like, who is this guy? Is he going to be like, okay, yeah, that's not my problem, I'm going back to the palace, or is he going to do something about it? So this is verse 12. Moses sees this, and looking this way and looking that way and seeing no one, he killed the Egyptian and hid him in the sand. The next day, he went back out there, and he saw two Hebrews fighting each other now. And he asked the one in the wrong, "Why are you hitting your fellow Hebrew?" And the man said, "Who made you ruler and judge over us? Or are you thinking of killing me as you killed that Egyptian?" So Moses was afraid and thought, what I did must have become known. And when Pharaoh heard of this, he tried to kill Moses, but Moses fled from Pharaoh and went to live in Midian, where he sat down by a well. So I'm going to stop right there for a second. Day one, Moses goes out and he makes a choice. He's like, am I a Hebrew or am I an Egyptian? And he sees what's happening to the Hebrews. And it says he looks this way and that, which is a way of saying he's just like quickly looked around the scene. Is there anyone watching? Am I going to get in trouble for this? And then he kills this man and hides his body in the sand. Now, some of you might think, wow, way to go, Moses. This dude saw this Egyptian dude oppressing a Hebrew dude, and he took matters into his own hand, and he did the right thing. Others might read around it and go, this seems a little shady. Like, Moses is not starting a revolution here. He's not saying, all right, guys, we're getting out of here. He clearly is like, okay, I don't want to be in trouble for this. I don't want any repercussions from this, but this bothers me, so I'm going to stop this from happening. So he murders this guy. However, he goes back the next day, which kind of tells me Moses is invested. He's not just going to murder this Egyptian and take off. He goes back the next day, and I think he's expecting to see more of the same. Egyptian fighting a Hebrew. But he goes down the next day, and he sees what? Two Hebrews fighting each other. And now all of a sudden, this doesn't really compute for Moses. So he asks, what are you guys doing? And their response cuts deep in two ways. One, they say, who made you ruler and judge over us? There's some foreshadowing of this too, because Moses eventually will be the ruler and judge over the Israelite people. But who made you ruler and judge, man? Are you going to kill me like you killed that Egyptian? This is shocking for Moses. One, he's been found out. It's very scary for Moses. I'll talk about that in a second. But people know he killed a guy. He killed an Egyptian, and he's going to be probably in trouble for it. So he's immediately afraid. The other thing that's just so tragic about this is for this man who grew up with two identities, he finally sided with one. He's like, I'm a Hebrew. And then the next day he goes back and his people reject him. They're like, who are you, son of Pharaoh? You're not our ruler. You're not our judge. Dude, you killed one of the Egyptians. You think that helped us? There's a missing Egyptian. Who are they going to blame, right? They're not going to blame you, the Prince of Egypt, which isn't the name of the movie. They're not going to blame you. They're going to blame us, man. That didn't help. I think Moses probably went home that day and he was like, I did my job, right? I saw an Egyptian beating a hero. I got rid of the problem. But man, he goes back the next day and he gets a sober reality, right? That no, that did not help. That did not fix anything. And they're like, man, you're not our ruler. You're not our judge. And so Moses, from this, is afraid. And when I first read this, I thought, man, that's weird that he's immediately like, oh yeah, I'm in huge trouble. He's royalty. But then it says in the next verse, Pharaoh tries to kill him for this. I think this also has something to do with Moses' identity, because Moses was a Hebrew, and it said the Egyptians really dreaded the Israelites. He grew up in Pharaoh's household, but I'm thinking Pharaoh and his people were probably looking for any excuse to get rid of Moses that they could find. I think that they were just kind of waiting for him to slip up or do something so that they could get rid of him. So the moment that Moses' murder comes to light, he killed an Egyptian, what a moment for Pharaoh and everyone to be like, yep, see, he's a problem. He's in our household. He kind of has a place of power, and he is siding with the Hebrews. Let's kill this guy. So Moses' response is he leaves. He runs away. He flees for his life to the land of the Midianites. This is Moses, guys. meet the hero of the story of Exodus. He murders a guy, it doesn't work, and he runs for it. This is the guy that we're going to be with for the next 2 years. No, I'm just kidding, as we go through the book of Exodus. But no, this is the main guy. This is the dude God is going to choose to bring his people out of suffering. Is this dude who tried, failed, and ran for it. So he goes to the land of the Midianites, and this is what happens. Now a priest of Midian had 7 daughters, and they came to draw water and to fill the troughs to water their father's flock. Some shepherds came along and drove them away, but Moses got up and came to their rescue and watered their flock. I love Moses, by the way, man. Anytime he sees any sort of injustice or oppression, the dude steps up. He's incapable of just looking the other way. It's great. So he steps in, and when the girls returned to Reuel, their father, he asked them, "Why have you guys returned so early today?" And they answered, "An Egyptian rescued us from the shepherds. He even drew water for us and watered the flock." So the father-in-law says, "Well, where is he? This guy really helped us out. Why did you leave him? Invite him to have something to eat." So Moses agreed to stay with the man, and he gave his daughter Zipporah to Moses in marriage. Zipporah gave birth to a son, and Moses named him Gershom, saying, "I have become a foreigner in a foreign land." Stop there for a second. So here in a minute, a couple verses down, we're going to find out that Moses becomes a shepherd for his father-in-law. So Moses runs from Egypt. He runs from this failure. He flees for his life. And he ends up saving or helping to save these women at a well. And it's interesting to me. I just think this jumped out to me for the first time ever as I was getting ready for this sermon, that when these women come back to their father and they report who helped them, they don't say some random guy. They don't say, "Oh, a Hebrew saved us," or "Oh, we don't know, just some guy." They clearly say, "No, it was an Egyptian who saved us." So Moses, even though he kind of sided with the Hebrews, that didn't really work out. And now he's in the desert, and either he clearly said, "Oh yeah, I'm an Egyptian," or the way he holds himself, the way he interacts with people says, "Oh yeah, this dude's an Egyptian." So I don't think Moses is totally clear-cut on who he is at this point. I don't think this guy has his entire identity figured out, "Oh yeah, I know who I am. I know what side of things I'm on." I think this guy, like I said, he tried, failed, and ran for it, and now he doesn't know which end is up. So much so, in fact, that he gets married and he has a son, and he names his son Foreigner, or another way of saying that is he names his son Outsider. That's where Moses' headspace is at. He's like, what am I going to name my kid? Oh yeah, I don't belong here. That's where Moses is at right now. He's like, am I a Hebrew? Am I an Egyptian? Am I a Midianite? I don't know. But Moses kind of just moves on from here. He doesn't know who he is. He tried. It didn't work out. Okay, great. I'm just going to be a shepherd in the desert now. And that's what he does for quite some time. The next verse is going to say that the king of Egypt died, and a long period of time passes. Moses, I think he probably, at this point in his life, just thinks, all that stuff's behind me. I did try. I did my best. It didn't work out, so I guess I'm done with that. I'm a shepherd now. Okay, just move on with my life. I think that's what he did. Moses moved on. This is what it says in verse 23 and 24. During that long period, the king of Egypt died, but the Israelites groaned out in their slavery, and they cried out. And their cry for help, because of their slavery, went up to God. And God heard their groaning, and he remembered his covenant with Abraham, with Isaac, and with Jacob. So God looked on the Israelites, and he was concerned about them. This is a huge shifting point in the story of Exodus, because for a couple chapters now, God has actually been pretty silent. You can go back and read Exodus 1 and 2. There's not a lot of talk of God being super active. You can see God at work in what's going on, for sure. You can see God moving, but it doesn't explicitly say this is what God felt about this, or this is what God did about this. He's kind of moving in the background. And right here, when Moses starts to just move on with his life, it's really clear that even though Moses moved on, God does not move on. God hears the crying of his people, and it says he remembered his covenant. Now, a covenant in the Bible is like this relational promise. It's this like, hey, I make a covenant. It's kind of like a marriage, right? It's vows, like, hey, I am with you no matter what. So God had made a covenant with these people, and it says he remembered it. Now, that remembering isn't the remembering of like, oh, God totally forgot about it, and then all of a sudden he thought, oh, yeah, that's right, I got that covenant with those guys. I gotta help them out. No. It's the type of remember that he never forgot. It's like if you tell somebody, hey, just to remember so-and-so's birthday is tomorrow, and they're like, oh, no, hey, trust me, I remember. I never forgot. Like, I remember. So God, man, he remembers his covenant with his people, and he hears their crying from slavery, and now he's going to do something about it. I think God gave Egypt and we're going to see this throughout the story, every opportunity that he could, and he was working in the background, but now God is coming down to make a difference. He is going to rescue his people. And he's going to meet with Moses to be the one to kind of be that tool for him. This is what happens in Exodus chapter 3. So I'm going to sum up some of this because we're going to talk about it next week. But God comes down, and the glory of God appears on this bush that burns, but it doesn't burn up. And so Moses walks over to the bush because he's like, that's really interesting and weird. And from this bush, God calls out to him, and he says, Moses, Moses. And Moses responds, here I am. And this is one of the first things God says to Moses in this section. This is in verse 6 of chapter 3. This is God talking to Moses, and he says, I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. And at this, Moses hid his face and was afraid to look at God. One of the first things God says to him is he's like, hey man, I'm the God of your father. This is really interesting because most of the time, this phrase is in the Bible a lot, that God was the God of the forefathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, but that's just it. It's normally plural. I'm the God of your fathers. When he meets with Moses, God says, I'm the God of your father, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. I think God is starting the conversation with Moses, recognizing Moses' confusion and saying, hey man, like, I'm the God of your father. Like, you're with me, dude. And this is what God says. He says, I have indeed seen the misery of my people in Egypt, and I've heard them crying out because of their slave drivers, and I am concerned about their suffering. So I have come down to rescue them from the hand of the Egyptians and to bring them up out of the land into a good and spacious land, a land flowing with milk and honey, the home of the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Amorites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites. And now the cry of the Israelites has reached me, and I have seen the way the Egyptians are oppressing them. So now go. I'm sending you to Pharaoh to bring my people, the Israelites, out of Egypt. Man, this verse gets me hyped up pretty fast. Because it starts this story of God revealing who he is to us. And I'm sure Moses thought God was silent. I'm sure the Israelites thought maybe God is silent. But right here, God's like, no, I have indeed seen the misery of my people. I have seen how the Egyptians are treating them. I've seen it all. And so now he says, I have come down to rescue them. Now I'm here, and this is going to change. This is a turning point in the book of Exodus where God is going to start to bring his people out of the land. And he says to Moses, hey, I'm going to send you to Pharaoh. You're my guy I'm choosing to go to Pharaoh and to do this. Now, I would like to think if I was in this position with God, I would go, all right, yes, like finally, let's do something about this. I'm your guy. Send me to Egypt. I'm going to do whatever you want me to do. Let's do this. But I have a feeling I would react more like how Moses reacts. This is how Moses responds to God. He says, who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the Israelites out of Egypt? Moses is like, me? Who am I to do that? God, I don't know if you saw this, but I tried. And it did not go well. I failed. They tried to kill me. God, I don't know. You probably haven't seen, I'm a shepherd now. I have a family here. Like that's not me. I relate with Moses so much on this. Because so often in life, when I'm reading scripture or I'm hearing a sermon or I'm feeling the call to do something in my life, my knee-jerk reaction is, who am I to do that? Like that's for somebody else to do. That's somebody else's job, not mine. Because God, I don't know if you've seen, but I failed. I could ask us to show a raise of hands for who has failed in their life, but I'm guessing it's going to be every single person in this room. Failure is a part of the human experience. We all fail. Moses failed big, yeah. And so he's like, me? God, not me. I don't even know who I am. I'm a shepherd for the Midianites, but I was raised by Egyptians, but I'm actually a Hebrew. God, I don't even know who I am. Do you know, that's the old me. Old me cared about that, and I tried to do something, but I've moved on. I think some of us do that as well. We move on. This whole going hard in the paint for Jesus, that's a young man's game. That's not me anymore. That's not my job. Who am I to do that, God? And I'm sure nagging in the back of his mind, if you're anything like me, man, I could hear 9 compliments and then 1 criticism, and those compliments, I'll forget them in a day, but that criticism will hang with me for the next 10 years of my life. And I'm sure in this moment, Moses is thinking of that one Israelite who said to him, who made you ruler and judge? He's like, man, God, they didn't even want me. I think you got to get somebody else because I'm not the guy for the job. Who am I to do that? So God here, I think he knows Moses' heart all too well, and he knows our hearts all too well. Because his response is one of my favorite things in the entire Bible. This is what God says to Moses. Moses says, who am I? And God says, I will be with you. And this will be a sign to you that it is I who have sent you. When you have brought the people up out of Egypt, you will worship God right here on this mountain. So Moses gives every excuse in the book for the rest of this conversation. And Moses is like, man, I don't even know who I am. Who am I, God, to even do this? And God's response isn't, hey, man, you're a Hebrew, or hey, man, you're the perfect guy because you were raised in Egypt, but you're going to go back. No. God's response is, hey, I'm with you. I will be with you. That's what matters. For anyone in this room who struggles with their identity, who am I, right? Or anyone who struggles with calling, what am I supposed to do? What am I called to do? If anyone in this room struggles with failure from the past, that it's just man, I am holding on to that and I cannot let go. Here's the deal. When we believe in Jesus and we believe in God as a Savior, here's what matters. God's with us. And when Moses remembers who he is, there is nothing that can stop Moses at all. When Moses remembers every day that God is with him, like that's who he is, it's a game changer. Because when we remember that God is with us, and that's what matters, then we can totally be who we were created to be. No fear can hold us back. No sin can hold us back. Failure can't hold us back. Who are we? Well, hey, we're God's, and he's with us. That's what's important. When I was a missionary in Mexico for a few years, and when I first moved down there, as you can imagine, it was really intimidating and scary at times, right? I was the new missionary in the area, and not only was I a missionary in Mexico, but a big part of that was rock climbing. So I was climbing in this new area with all these like amazing rock climbers, and sometimes it was intimidating, or sometimes I was nervous, and sometimes I was scared. But when I got down there, there was another missionary who was kind of my boss, who had been there a long time, and his name was Sean. And I love Sean like to death. I love this guy so much. And I got there, and Sean, man, he's been at this a long time. This dude's fluent in Spanish, great missionary, amazing rock climber. And for the first, few months I was there, I would always be with Sean. And there were lots of days where I would think, man, who am I to even be here doing this? And there were lots of days I really would be scared. But then I would remember, okay, but it's okay because Sean's here. It's okay because Sean is right here and he knows what he's doing. We can take a breath of air, take a big, deep breath because, hey, you know what? Life is tough and confusing, but God is with us, and that's what matters. We can, like Moses, go out there and serve the Lord, not because we've got it all together, but because he's with us, so it's okay. So he can do amazing and mighty things. The author of Hebrews in the New Testament reflects on this, and this is what he says about Moses. This is in Hebrews chapter 11. He said, "By faith, Moses, when he had grown up, refused to be known as the son of Pharaoh's daughter. But instead, he chose to be mistreated along with the people of God rather than to enjoy the fleeting pleasures of sin." I love how the author of Hebrews puts it. Because Moses has faith in God. I'm going to say something. I think it's pretty easy to pretend to be a Christian and have no faith in God. It's pretty easy to do because we can just kind of talk the talk and not walk the walk. I have definitely been guilty of that in my life, for sure. But Moses has faith in God. It's the real deal. It's the actual faith. Like, I trust this guy. I'm going out on a limb for him. I went on a mission trip one time to the Philippines, and we went to this training for like a week, this like super high tense, like you're going to a dangerous part of the world. How do you get yourself out if you get kidnapped training? And it was like super scary. Like that's what they were trying to do, is scare us, and it worked really, really well. But before we went, I told this guy named Josh, who had been before, I was like, man, dude, can I just be honest with you? No one else was around. It's really funny. Like Moses, I looked around. I was like, no one's around but Josh. He's the only one who's been before. And I was like, Josh, I'm scared. Like, am I the only one who feels like this is scary? And I'll never forget what Josh said to me. Josh was like, oh yeah, dude, like you should be. I was like, what? Like, I came to you to comfort me, man. And he goes, yeah, man, like, yeah, you have a right to be scared. But he's like, it's all right, man, because God's with us. And I think I learned a super important lesson that day. Faith is faith when you actually trust it and you go out on a limb for it. That's faith. That's the real deal. And Moses, yeah, he could have lived in Egypt for the rest of his life. Moses could have been like, man, this whole thing with the Israelites, not a fan, but like, man, being in Pharaoh's household is pretty good. It's a pretty good spot. But he had faith in God, so instead he chose to be mistreated with his own people. He chose to reject his Egyptian side and fully go on the Hebrew side. Why? Not because Moses is all that in a bag of chips. Not because Moses has everything together or he's perfect or anything like that. No, it's because God is with him. When I was getting this sermon together, it's funny because pretty much every week I have this moment where I'm like, hold on. Who am I to get up on stage and talk about God's word in front of other people? Like, who am I to do that? And like, maybe I don't put it in those words, but I will be honest, I have that moment every week. So getting ready for a sermon like this, and I'm like, whoa, hold on, this should not be me. And then I'm like, hold on, actually, yeah, because it's not up to me. If God is with me, then I'm good. If God is with us, Common Ground, First Methodist, there's nothing we can't do. Moses is a great example of that because he gave up everything he had in Egypt to be with the Hebrew people. Another great example of that is Jesus. This is what it says about Jesus in the book of Philippians. Chapter 2, it says, "In your relationship with one another, have the same mindset as Christ Jesus, who being in very nature God, did not consider equality with God as something to be grasped or to be used for his own advantage. Rather, he made himself nothing by taking on the very nature of a servant, being made in human likeness. And being found in appearance as a man, he humbled himself by becoming obedient to death, even to death on a cross."